I was dusting the top shelf of Harold's old wardrobe when my hand brushed against something that didn't belong. The wood sounded hollow, too hollow. For a moment, I froze, the feather duster still in my hand, my heart suddenly too loud in the quiet bedroom. That wardrobe had been his domain. Even after he passed, I barely touched it out of respect, out of grief, maybe out of fear of what memories might fall out. But that day, something in me, some whisper I couldn't name, told me to keep going. Harold had been gone for 8 months. We'd been married 51 years, and losing him felt like someone had erased color from my world. Everything was gray, the morning coffee, the garden he once tended. Even the air felt heavier. Yet, that day, I don't know why, I decided to clean. Maybe I was finally ready to face the ghosts that lived in his shirts and ties. The closet smelled faintly of cedar and old cologne, the kind he wore every Sunday. As I pushed aside the hanging coats, I saw a panel at the back that didn't match the rest of the wall. It had a faint outline, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. My fingers trembled as I pressed against it. It didn't budge. But then I noticed one of the hooks on the inside was oddly positioned, like a lever disguised as a coat hanger. When I pulled it, the panel shifted with a soft click. A draft of cold air brushed my face, carrying a smell stale, earthy, almost metallic. My stomach twisted. Behind that panel was a narrow door, wooden, unpainted, and locked with an old latch. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at it, my mind racing with questions I couldn't yet ask aloud. Why would my husband have a door behind his closet? And why had he never told me? Harold wasn't the type to keep secrets, or at least I thought he wasn't. He was gentle, methodical, the kind of man who left love notes in lunchboxes and remembered anniversaries better than I did. We had our share of hardships, God knows. Every marriage does, but I believed I knew him, completely. Now, that belief felt suddenly fragile. I fetched a flashlight from the drawer by the bed, our old one with the chipped handle, and came back, my breath shaky. The latch gave way with a small tug, and the door creaked open to reveal darkness. A set of narrow stairs led downward, swallowed by shadow. It took me a few moments to gather the courage to descend. My knees aren't what they used to be, but fear makes the body remember youth. I went down slowly, one hand gripping the rail, the other clutching the flashlight. Each step groaned under my weight, as though complaining about my intrusion. At the bottom, I found myself in a small, windowless room. The air was cold and damp. My light flickered across stone walls, rough, unfinished, and a single wooden table covered with dust. On it sat a box, metal, rusted, padlocked. My breath hitched again. The kind of box you'd see in war movies. Used to hide things people didn't want found. I didn't dare open it, not yet. Instead, I looked around. There were shelves lined with old papers, a few glass jars, and photographs, faded, curling at the edges. I picked one up carefully. It was of Harold, much younger, standing beside a woman I didn't recognize. She wasn't me. She looked about my age when we first met, her hand resting on his shoulder like they were something more than friends. My throat tightened. I whispered his name out loud, as if he could somehow explain himself from beyond the grave. Harold, what is this? The flashlight's beam caught another frame on the far wall, a newspaper clipping pinned up with yellowed tape. I stepped closer. It was dated 1972. The headline read, "Local woman disappears without a trace, last seen near Riverside Motel." And below, the photograph of the missing woman was the same woman from the picture with Harold. I felt my legs weaken. I had to steady myself against the wall. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. This couldn't be real. My Harold? The man who never raised his voice? The man who cried when our dog died? He couldn't be connected to something like this. I stumbled back to the table and sat on a small stool, my hands shaking. My mind began pulling memories, stray comments he'd made over the years. Odd nights when he'd gone for drives, he said, cleared his head. The times I'd woken up at dawn and found him sitting silently in that very closet, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. The silence of that hidden room was unbearable. It pressed against my ears until I could almost hear whispers. I turned off the flashlight for a moment, just to see if I could still feel him there. I did. Not as comfort, but as presence, heavy, watching. I wanted to run upstairs, close the door, and pretend none of this existed. But something inside me, some deep ache that came from 51 years of marriage, refused to leave it there. If Harold had secrets, I needed to know them, even if it broke me. I took the box and brought it upstairs, setting it on the kitchen table. The padlock was old, but fragile. I found Harold's toolbox in the garage and used a small hammer to break it. The lock snapped after a few hits, and the lid creaked open. Inside were letters, dozens of them, neatly tied in faded blue ribbon, each addressed to my love, C. My name doesn't start with C. My fingers went cold. I untied one ribbon, the paper crinkling under my trembling touch. The handwriting was Harold's elegant, careful. The date on the first letter was 1971, a year before we married. The words began softly, sweetly, almost tender. My darling Clara, every night I think of you. I dream of your hair, your laughter, the way you said my name when no one was around. I read until I couldn't breathe. He wrote of their secret meetings, of promises to leave everything behind, of guilt and longing. The final lines made my skin crawl. If they ever find out what we did by the river, I'll never forgive myself, but I'll protect you, always. No one will ever know. The letter slipped from my hand. My mouth went dry. The newspaper clipping, the missing woman Clara, what we did by the river. I stumbled back from the table, one hand over my mouth. My mind refused to connect the pieces, but they were already forming a terrible picture. My husband, my Harold, had loved another woman, and something had happened to her. Something dark enough to hide behind a locked door for half a century. The house felt suddenly unfamiliar, as if it belonged to a stranger. Every corner, every photo on the wall looked different now, distorted by the shadow of secrets. I thought I knew everything about him. His gentle laugh, his morning habits, his devotion. But that night, as the wind howled outside and I sat staring at the open box of lies, I realized I had been living with a man I didn't really know at all. And Whatever was buried behind that hidden door, whatever by the river meant, wasn't finished haunting me yet. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Harold's handwriting, those words looping through my mind like a curse, what we did by the river. I kept trying to convince myself there was an explanation, that maybe Clara had just left town, that maybe Harold had been trying to protect her from something, not hurt her, but the rational part of me, the quiet voice that had lived through too many years of knowing how people truly are, whispered that love and guilt often walk hand in hand. By dawn, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a blanket over my shoulders, staring at that box. The letters lay open like wounds. Outside, the world was waking up, the neighbor's car starting, birds chirping, but inside my house, everything felt wrong. Even the light seemed different, cold, suspicious. I made tea, my hands trembling as I poured. It was the same teapot Harold had bought me on our 10th anniversary, with the tiny crack along the handle he'd promised to fix but never did. Funny how even that tiny flaw now felt like a clue, something unfinished, hidden, like him. I went back to the closet later that morning. I needed to see that room again, to be sure I hadn't imagined it. I half expected to find the wall sealed, the door gone, as if my grief had conjured the whole thing. But it was still there, the secret, patient as ever. I turned on the flashlight again and descended the steps. The air seemed colder this time, and quieter, like the walls were holding their breath. I looked closer at the shelves. Some of the jars had labels faded beyond reading, but one caught my eye. It was small, square, and inside was what looked like, oh God, a lock of hair, blonde, tied with a red ribbon. My heart dropped into my stomach. I remembered the newspaper photo. Clara's hair had been light. I put the jar back, my fingers shaking uncontrollably. Then I noticed something I hadn't before. On the floor, near the far wall, was a small wooden chest covered by an old tarp. I pulled it aside and coughed as dust filled the air. The chest had no lock, only a rusted latch. I opened it and found clothing, a woman's dress, faded blue, torn near the collar, and shoes, wrapped carefully in newspaper dated 1972. I stumbled back, tears blurring my sight. I didn't want to believe what was right in front of me. My Harold, my kind, gentle husband, he couldn't have done something this. There had to be another explanation, but the evidence didn't care about my disbelief. I ran my fingers along the wall, desperate for something, anything to prove me wrong. And that's when I felt it, a metal ring embedded in the floorboards. I pulled at it, and a section of the floor lifted, revealing a small crawl space underneath. My flashlight trembled as I leaned closer. Beneath the boards, wrapped in layers of plastic, was something that made my blood freeze. A shape, human-shaped. I screamed, not loud, but the kind of sound that comes from the soul when it finally breaks. I staggered back, my knees giving way. The flashlight clattered against the wall, and for a moment the beam landed on a framed photo I hadn't noticed before. Harold in uniform, smiling proudly beside our wedding picture. His eyes seemed to follow me, calm, almost sorry. I don't remember how long I sat there. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. When I finally climbed back upstairs, I locked the closet door behind me and collapsed on the bed. My body was trembling, my heart pounding so violently I thought I might not make it through the day. I didn't call the police right away. I wish I could say I did. But after 51 years of loving someone, of building a life, you don't just switch off that love because of horror. You want to understand first. You want to know why. That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen the way Harold used to do when the power went out, and sat beside that box of letters. I began to read every single one. Some were sweet, some were desperate, and some were horrifying. She said she'd tell your wife. One letter read, "You can't let her ruin everything. Meet me by the river again. We have to decide." In another, Harold had written, "Clara, it was an accident. She slipped. You know I never meant for this to happen. But we can't go to the police. They'll think it was me. I buried her by the bend where the willow trees meet the water. Please, forgive me." I dropped the paper. My breath came in short gasps. My Harold had buried her. I wanted to be sick. I wanted to scream his name, to ask him how he could hold me all these years, knowing what he'd done, how he could laugh, make tea, kiss me goodnight, and still carry this in his heart. But what broke me most was one final letter, dated 1,985 years after Clara had vanished. Sometimes I hear her at night. I see her by the closet door, watching. I keep the room sealed now, but she's still there. I made a promise, and I broke it. If she ever forgives me, maybe I'll finally rest. Rest. That word chilled me. Harold had lived almost 40 more years after that. Did he see her every night? Did he keep that door as penance? A shrine to his own guilt? I looked around our home, suddenly realizing how often he avoided the bedroom, how he'd always insisted on keeping that closet closed, even in summer when it was hot. I remembered once waking up to him standing inside, whispering to himself. I'd thought he was dreaming, but now maybe he wasn't alone. For days, I barely spoke to anyone. My daughter called, worried. I told her I wasn't feeling well. How could I tell her her father wasn't the man she thought he was? On the 5th night, I heard it, a sound, from the closet. At first, it was faint, a slow, dragging noise, like fabric against wood. Then a soft thump. I told myself it was the wind, or the house settling. But when I turned off the lamp, I saw it. The faintest glow, coming from the crack of that hidden door, like candlelight from another world. My heart almost stopped. My voice trembled as I whispered, "Harold." No answer, just a quiet, rhythmic knock, 3 times. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My body felt frozen in time, trapped between the woman I used to be and the truth I could no longer unsee. When morning came, I opened the closet again. The door stood slightly ajar. The air inside smelled faintly of roses, Clara's perfume, the one I'd found once among Harold's old belongings and thought nothing of. And on the top step leading down to the hidden room lay a single wilted lily, That wilted lily sat on the step like a message from the dead. I didn't touch it. I just stared, my pulse hammering so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I tried to convince myself that I'd somehow left it there, that I must have dropped it from a bouquet once, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. I hadn't brought flowers into that room ever. Harold had. The rest of the day passed in a fog. I kept moving through the house as if in a trance, my mind refusing to settle. Every sound made me flinch: the ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even the creak of the floorboards. It felt like the house was alive now, whispering secrets through the walls. By evening, I couldn't stand it anymore. I went back to the kitchen, poured myself a small glass of whiskey, Harold's old brand, and sat staring at the lily I'd placed on the table. I kept wondering if I was losing my mind. Grief plays tricks, I told myself. It twists the edges of reality until you can't tell what's real and what's your heart trying to make sense of loss. But then the power went out. Just like that darkness swallowed everything. I sat frozen, the glass trembling in my hand. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, and somewhere deep within the house came that sound again, a faint creak from the direction of the bedroom. My bedroom, the one with the hidden door. I should have called someone. I should have left the house, but curiosity, the same dangerous thread that had led me this far, pulled me to my feet. I lit a candle and made my way down the hall, every step echoing louder than the last. The door to the closet stood slightly open now, swaying as if someone had just walked through it. "Harold," I whispered again, barely able to breathe. The name came out cracked, fragile, like I was speaking it through time. The candlelight flickered across the doorway, revealing the shadow of the narrow stairs beyond. I took one cautious step forward. The smell of damp earth hit me again, stronger this time, mixed with something faintly sweet like perfume. Clara's scent. I descended slowly, candle trembling in my hand. At the bottom, everything looked just as it had before, except the chest in the corner was open, its contents scattered across the floor, the dress, the shoes, the newspaper, and on the wall, written faintly in chalk, was a word that hadn't been there before. Why? I dropped the candle. It rolled, flame still alive, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. I backed away, pressing my hands to my mouth. The air felt colder than before, almost suffocating. I could hear my heart beat, and beneath it something else. A faint humming. A woman's voice, barely audible, humming the tune of Blue Moon. It was the song Harold used to play on our old record player the night we first danced in this house. I ran. I didn't care about the stairs or the candle or anything else. I just ran. My feet barely touched the ground as I fled back upstairs, slammed the closet door shut and locked it with shaking hands. Then I collapsed against it, gasping for air, sobbing so hard I could barely see. I didn't open that door for 3 days, but the house wouldn't let me rest. I started hearing whispers at night, sometimes faint footsteps pacing above when I knew no one else was there. Once, I woke up to find Harold's photo, our wedding photo, lying face down on my bedside table. Another morning, I found muddy footprints in the hallway leading toward the bedroom. I couldn't tell if it was my imagination or something else entirely. I called my daughter, Emily, Told her maybe I needed company. She offered to stay a few nights, but I lied and said I was fine. How could I tell her what was really happening? That her mother was being haunted by the ghosts of her father's sins? On the fourth night, I decided I couldn't live like this anymore. If the truth wanted to come out, I'd let it. I went back to the hidden room, but this time I brought something with me. Harold's old tape recorder. He'd used it to record lectures when he was teaching, and it still worked. I wanted proof of whatever was happening down there. I pressed record, set it on the table, and whispered, "If anyone is here, please tell me the truth." The silence stretched long enough for me to feel foolish. Then, faintly, through the static, came a soft, trembling voice. He promised he'd come back. He promised. I froze. My blood went cold. The voice wasn't mine. And it wasn't Harold's either. I let the recorder run until the candle burned low, but the voice never returned. When I played it back upstairs, it was still there, clear as day, right after my question. A woman's voice, sad and lost. He promised he'd come back. He promised. I sat there in my living room, staring at that recorder, and realized something terrible. Whatever had happened by that river all those years ago, it wasn't over. Not for her. And not for me. That night, I dreamed of Harold for the first time since he died. He was standing by the riverbank, his back to me, staring into the water. When I called out to him, he turned his face pale, eyes hollow, and said, "Don't open the rest." Then he vanished, and I woke up with the sound of rushing water still echoing in my ears. I knew then that the answer wasn't just in the room, it was by the river. The next morning, I packed a small bag, tucked the letters into it, and drove out to the old riverside road outside town. I hadn't been there in years. The water was lower now, the willows taller. But when I reached the bend where the trees curved inward like they were hiding something, I saw it. A small patch of disturbed earth near the roots, fresh, like someone had been digging. I fell to my knees, tears spilling freely. My heart felt like it was cracking open. "Harold," I whispered, "what did you do?" And then I saw something glinting among the roots, a piece of metal, half buried in the soil. I brushed the dirt away and pulled it out. It was Harold's wedding ring, but I'd buried him with it. The ring slipped from my fingers and landed in the mud with a dull thud. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The sky hung low and gray over the river, the same river that had once meant picnics, laughter, and Sunday afternoons. Now it felt like a graveyard. The air was heavy with the scent of moss and decay, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the slow, steady rush of water like breathing, like the earth itself remembering. I stared at that patch of disturbed soil. My mind swirled with questions I wasn't ready to ask. Who had been digging? Why was his ring here when I had seen it on his cold hand before they closed the coffin? I remembered touching it, even kissing it through tears, whispering goodbye. That wasn't something you imagined. Someone had taken it, or maybe someone had brought it back. A sound broke through my thoughts, the crunch of footsteps on the gravel path behind me. I turned sharply, my heart hammering. A man in a tan coat stood a few yards away, holding a fishing rod. His face was shadowed by his hat, but his voice was kind when he spoke. "Morning, ma'am." Didn't mean to startle you. I forced a shaky smile. Oh, it's fine. I just dropped something. He nodded toward the ground. This place gets quiet. Most folks avoid it. Bad memory spot, they say. You sure you're all right? Bad memory spot? I repeated. He nodded, leaning on his rod. You didn't hear? Back in the 70 seconds, a young woman went missing around here. Never found her body. People said her sweetheart worked at the school nearby. He just up and left town after she vanished. My breath hitched. Left town? Yep, real shame. Some say she still haunts the river. They hear her crying when the fog rolls in. He chuckled awkwardly, then tipped his hat. Sorry, didn't mean to spook you. Have a good day, ma'am. He walked away, leaving me frozen in place. The earth beneath my feet suddenly felt thinner, fragile, like one wrong step might collapse it entirely. When I finally found the strength to move, I picked up the ring and held it tightly in my palm. I couldn't bring myself to leave it there. It felt like a message, an unfinished conversation between Harold and the truth. I slipped it into my pocket, whispering to the river, I'll find out what you did. I promise. That night, I sat at the kitchen table again, the ring lying between the letters. I could feel Harold everywhere, in the hum of the refrigerator, in the faint ticking of the clock, even in the shadows that stretched longer than they should have. I didn't know whether I wanted answers or forgiveness anymore. Maybe both. I decided to dig deeper literally and figuratively. The next morning, I went to the local archives, the old building near the post office where everything smelled of paper and dust. The clerk, a young man with kind eyes, helped me search through the records. There it was. Clara Whitmore, age 26, disappeared the 12th of May, 1972, last seen at Riverside Motel. There were police notes, old witness statements, and one faded photo clipped to the report. In the background of that photo, barely visible, was a man getting into a car, the same model Harold used to drive. I left the archives feeling like I was walking through a dream I couldn't wake from. Every truth I uncovered seemed to birth a dozen more lies. My husband had been part of something unspeakable. But the question wasn't just what he did. It was why he built that hidden room, and what he'd been trying to keep in or out. That evening, I went back to the closet. My hand trembled on the handle, but I opened it anyway. The door to the hidden room creaked like an old throat clearing itself. The air that came out was ice cold, as though the house had been holding its breath all day. I took the flashlight and descended. Everything was as before: the table, the shelves, the jars. But now, in the middle of the room, sat a small wooden box I hadn't seen before. It wasn't dusty. It was new. There was a note on top. You shouldn't have gone to the river. My legs gave out, and I fell against the wall, the breath leaving my lungs in a sharp cry. I looked around wildly, half expecting something to step out of the shadows. No one did. Only the flicker of my flashlight danced across the walls, landing on the word "Why," still faintly written there. Hands shaking, I opened the box. Inside was a single cassette tape and a folded photograph. The photo was of me young, newly married, smiling beside Harold in front of this very house. On the back, written in his handwriting, were 4 words, "Forgive me, my love." The tape was labeled 1972. I didn't want to play it, but I did. I took the tape recorder from the living room shelf, the same one that had captured Clara's voice, and slipped the cassette in. The tape hissed for a few seconds before a voice filled the room. Harold's, "If someone finds this, it means I couldn't keep it buried any longer." His voice cracked, heavy with tears. "I didn't mean to hurt her. God knows I didn't. Clara, she wanted to tell Margaret about us, about everything. We argued by the river." She slipped, hit her head. "I panicked. I couldn't let them blame her, or me. I thought if I hid her, if I prayed hard enough, I could forget. But I never did. She never let me." There was a long pause, broken by a faint sound, sobbing. Then he whispered, "She's still here, Margaret. I see her every night, in the mirror, in the water, behind the closet. I built that room to keep her close, to make peace. But she won't go. She says I took her voice, so now she's taking mine." The tape clicked off. I sat there, frozen, my hands covering my mouth. Every cell in my body felt hollow. He hadn't been hiding from the police. He'd been haunted, literally and figuratively. And now, maybe, she wasn't finished. Suddenly, from the corner of the room, I heard the faint hum again. Blue moon, slow, soft, and unbearably sad. The candle I'd brought flickered violently, then went out, and in that brief, suffocating darkness, I heard her voice clear, right beside my ear. He promised he'd come back. I ran again, up the stairs, through the hallway, out into the night. I didn't look back until I was standing in the garden, gasping for air under the pale moonlight. The house loomed behind me, silent, watching, and, for the first time, I noticed something strange about the upstairs window, the one that looked into our bedroom. There was a figure standing there, a woman, smiling. I stood, frozen in the garden, the cold night air cutting through my thin sweater, my breath fogging in front of me. The figure at the window didn't move. She just stood there, still as stone, her pale face half hidden by the curtain. The moonlight fell across her hair. It looked silver, or maybe gold, and I could have sworn she was smiling, not kindly, but knowingly. I wanted to shout, but no sound came out. My legs felt heavy, like they were sinking into the earth. Then the light in the bedroom flickered, once, twice, and went out. When it did, the figure vanished too. I stayed outside for a long time, staring at that window, half expecting her to appear again. But she didn't. Only the wind moved now, whispering through the trees, carrying the faint scent of roses, Clara's roses. I'd never planted any in the garden, but Harold used to bring them home sometimes, back when we were newly married. He said they reminded him of a promise. I thought it meant our vows. Now I wasn't so sure. Eventually, I forced myself back inside. The house was utterly silent, too silent. I locked the back door, turned on every light, and sat on the couch with the recorder in my lap. Harold's words echoed in my head like a curse. She says I took her voice, so now she's taking mine. I pressed play again, listening to the tape, just to be certain I hadn't imagined it. His voice trembled, but there was something else in it this time, something I hadn't noticed before. Between his pauses, between the hiss of the old tape, I could hear another sound, soft breathing, not his, a woman's. I rewound and listened again, leaning closer. The breathing grew louder, closer, until in the final few seconds before the tape cut off, I heard a whisper. "Margaret." She said my name. The recorder slipped from my hands and clattered to the floor. I backed away until my knees hit the coffee table. My heart was racing so hard I thought I might faint. How did she know my name? How did she know me? That night I didn't go upstairs. I slept, or tried to, on the couch, the lamp left on. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that window and the faint outline of her face. But around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps again. Slow, deliberate, coming from above. The floorboards creaked under invisible weight. Then, faintly, a door opened the closet door. I buried my face in my hands, whispering, "Please, please, just stop." But the sound didn't stop. It came closer, down the stairs, each step heavier than the last. When it reached the hallway, everything went quiet. Then 3 knocks on the living room door. I couldn't breathe. I didn't move. The knocks came again, slow, patient, like someone who already knew I'd answer eventually. I must have sat there for an hour before I gathered the courage to whisper, "What do you want?" No reply, only silence. And then, from the other side of the door, a soft scrape like something being slid underneath. I waited a long time before I dared to look. It was a photograph, old, yellowed, and curling at the corners. It showed Harold, standing by the river again, his arm around Clara. But this time, behind them, almost invisible in the background, was me. It wasn't possible. I hadn't even met Harold yet when that photo was taken. My blood ran cold. The next morning, I called the church. I asked to speak to Father Thomas, the same priest who had done Harold's funeral service. He was gentle, kind. I didn't tell him everything, only that I felt something unholy was in the house. He offered to come by and bless it. When he arrived, I showed him the room behind the closet. He frowned as he stepped inside, holding his small cross. "You said your husband built this?" "Yes," I said quietly. He was keeping something here." He moved his flashlight over the walls, then stopped at the chalk writing "Why." He bent closer. "This is fresh," he murmured. "Not from the 70s. My stomach turned. "Fresh?" He nodded. "Someone's been down here recently." "But who?" "No one had keys to this house but me." He sprinkled holy water, murmuring prayers. For a moment, the air grew thick, almost heavy enough to press against my chest. The candle flickered violently again, though there was no breeze. I swear I heard it then, a woman's sigh, long and tired, like the exhale of someone finally being noticed. Father Thomas's voice wavered mid-prayer, his eyes flicking to the corner where the chest stood. He stepped closer, opened it again, and frowned. The torn blue dress was gone. "Did you move this?" he asked. I shook my head. My whole body trembled. We both heard it at the same time, a faint humming from somewhere above us, the same song. Blue moon, he turned to me. Stay here. But I couldn't. I followed him up the stairs, heart hammering, until we reached the bedroom. The record player on the dresser was spinning, though the needle wasn't touching any record. The melody came from nowhere, circling through the air. Father Thomas made the sign of the cross. Whatever is here, he said, it's tied to what was done. Until it's acknowledged, truly acknowledged, it won't rest. I whispered, You mean her? He nodded slowly. You must set her free. After he left, I sat on the bed for hours, staring at the wall where the hidden door stood. Set her free. But how? I didn't even know where her body was, only that Harold had buried her by the bend, the same place I'd found his ring. That evening, I took a spade from the shed and drove back to the river. The fog rolled low and thick, curling around the trees like fingers. I walked to the bend, guided by some strange, steady pull in my chest. The ground where I'd found the ring was damp, the soil soft. I began to dig. Each strike of the spade into the earth felt heavier than the last. I didn't know what I expected to find, but I knew I had to try. After a few minutes, the metal hit something solid. Wood. A small box. I knelt, brushing away the mud. The lid came loose easily. Inside was a bundle of cloth so fragile it fell apart when I touched it, and a single locket. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a picture of Harold and me. The inscription read, For my Clara, my heart, my guilt, my truth. My breath caught. Clara wasn't just the woman he'd loved. She'd known about me, about us. He hadn't just killed his mistress, he'd killed the part of himself that couldn't choose. And somehow, I realized with horror, she knew me before I ever knew him. Because the woman in the photograph, the one standing behind Harold and Clara at the river, wasn't me now. But it was me then. My face, my smile, everything the same. I dropped the locket, falling back into the mud, trembling as the realization hit like thunder. Clara hadn't just vanished, she had become me. Or maybe I had become her. The truth hit me so hard I thought the ground would swallow me whole. The river roared in my ears, louder than before, as though it too had waited decades for me to finally understand. The locket lay open on the mud, the faces inside Harold's and mine staring up at me, frozen in a love that now felt like betrayal and destiny tangled together. If Clara had somehow become me, or if I had become her, what did that even mean? Was I living someone else's life? Or was this the cruel echo of a woman who had died too soon, still looking for peace through the only person her soul could reach? The air grew colder. My breath came out in quick, white clouds. I looked toward the water, and there she was, Clara, standing knee-deep in the river, wearing that same faded blue dress I'd seen in the chest. Her hair drifted like silver in the moonlight, her eyes soft but sorrowful. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked tired. Why did you come back? I whispered, my voice shaking. Her lips moved, though the sound that came was more like the river itself speaking through her. To remember, to finish what he began. I don't understand, I said, stepping closer, mud clutching at my shoes. Who are you now? What do you want from me? She tilted her head, and for a moment her face flickered like the shimmer of light on water. 1 second it was hers, the next it was mine. You were never meant to forget, she said. He tried to bury us both. The words rattled inside me. Both? She nodded slowly, stepping closer to the bank. You were her second chance. The same soul, given a quieter life. But the truth never stays buried. It calls, even from the dark. I wanted to run, to scream, to reject what I was hearing, but deep down, something in me knew it was true. All those moments in life I couldn't explain, the dreams of drowning, the strange déjà vu when Harold would hold me near the river, the way he'd look at me sometimes with a mix of love and terror. It all made sense now. He hadn't just been haunted by guilt. He'd been haunted by me. Clara lifted her hand, pointing toward the patch of ground where I had dug. Set it right, she whispered. Say my name, and let me go. Tears blurred my vision. I dropped to my knees and began digging again with my bare hands, the soil cold and wet under my fingernails. After a few minutes, I uncovered the edge of something soft, a fragment of cloth, then bones, delicate and pale. I stopped, sobbing. Clara Whitmore, I whispered through the tears. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't remember. The wind shifted. The trees bent. The air grew suddenly still, heavy with silence. And then I heard her laughing, softly, like a sigh. Thank you, she said. When I looked up, she was gone. The river had gone calm, its surface like glass. The moon broke through the clouds, bathing everything in silver. For the first time in weeks, the ache in my chest eased. I covered the spot gently, whispering a prayer, then placed the locket atop the mound. The inscription shimmered faintly in the moonlight before sinking into the soil, as though the earth itself had taken it back. When I drove home that night, the house felt different, warmer, still old, still full of memories, but no longer suffocating. The whispers had stopped. The air no longer carried that cold weight. I went straight to the bedroom, opened the closet, and stared at the hidden door. It was still ajar, the smell of cedar faintly mixing with the night breeze. I stepped inside one last time. The room below was empty now. The jars were gone, the shelves bare. Only the word "Y" remained on the wall, but it had faded to almost nothing, like chalk washed by rain. On the table lay one final letter. It was addressed to me, written in Harold's familiar hand. My dearest Margaret, if you've found this, then you know. I tried all my life to make peace with what happened, but I could never tell you the truth. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you too. You were my forgiveness, my chance to love the same soul twice and do it right this time. I failed Clara once, but I never stopped loving her, and somehow I found her again in you. If she's found you, let her go. And when she does, please, let me go too. You were the light after my darkness. Thank you for loving me, even when I didn't deserve it. Harold. By the time I finished reading, my tears had soaked the paper. I pressed it to my chest and whispered his name until my voice broke. For the first time, I understood the weight he'd carried, the unbearable guilt, the endless nights spent keeping that door locked, trying to trap the past behind it. He hadn't built a prison, he'd built a grave, and then he'd spent 50 years guarding it. When I finally left the room, I closed the door gently and nailed the panel shut. Some secrets don't need to be kept anymore. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the window. The birds outside were singing again, and for once the house was silent in the right way, peaceful. I made my tea, the same as always, and sat by the kitchen window watching the river shimmer in the distance. For a long while, I just breathed. Then I noticed something on the windowsill, a single white lily. Fresh, no note, no explanation, just the flower glowing faintly in the light. I smiled through the tears. "Goodbye, Clara," I whispered. "Goodbye, Harold." That night I dreamt of them both, standing hand in hand by the river, smiling. The water was calm, the moon full. They waved once before fading into the mist. When I woke, the clock read 3:33 a.m., the same time the knocks had come those nights before. But this time, there was no fear. Only stillness, only peace. I went to the closet, touched the wooden door, and whispered, "It's over." And for the first time since Harold's death, I slept soundly. In the morning, the carpenter who came to repair the wall said something strange. "Ma'am," he called out, peering into the wood, "did you know there's another message carved behind this panel?" I walked over, curious. He stepped aside, and there it was faint, etched in Harold's handwriting, "Forever forgiven." I smiled through my tears. The light caught the letters just right, and for a heartbeat I could almost feel his hand over mine again. It's been months now since that day. The closet stands sealed, the river runs quietly, and sometimes when the wind moves just right, I hear faint humming from the garden. Blue moon. And instead of fear, it fills me with warmth, because I know now, it isn't a haunting anymore. It's love remembered,